The desert was merciless. The sun had dipped low, yet its afterburn still scorched the earth, turning every rock and patch of sand into a furnace. Emma staggered forward, her lips cracked, her bonnet torn from branches hours ago. Dust clung to her dress, and her boots felt like lead as she dragged one foot in front of the other. She had lost the wagon trail sometime after the storm, when the thunder rolled in so suddenly it spooked the oxen. In the chaos, while others pushed ahead, she had been thrown from the path and left behind. She told herself they would circle back for her, but hours stretched into a hopeless silence. By late afternoon, her throat burned with thirst. She tried to whisper her own name, just to hear a human voice, but even that sounded foreign and small in the vastness of the land. The desert mocked her with endless sameness. Sand, rock, sagebrush, then more sand again. She stumbled over a dry creek bed, her knees scraping against stone, and for a moment she thought she might stay there and let the world close in. But instinct, some stubborn spark of life, forced her back to her feet. She pressed onward. When night began to crawl across the sky, the cold came swiftly, sharp and biting after the day's blaze. Emma wrapped her arms around herself and shivered. It was then she noticed it, a glow on the horizon, faint but steady. Her heart quickened. Fire. Fire meant life. Fire meant people. Fire meant salvation. With trembling steps she followed it. Each stride felt longer than the last, her vision blurring, her chest tight, but the glow grew larger until finally, through the gathering darkness, she saw him, the man by the fire. He sat cross-legged, tall and still, like a carved statue of the wilderness itself. His skin was bronzed by sun and life in open air, his black hair falling loose around his shoulders. An Apache. Emma had heard whispers of them in hushed tones around campfires, fierce, proud, feared by many settlers who did not understand their ways. Now, one sat only yards away, flames painting shadows across his face. Her instinct screamed at her to turn back, to hide, to flee. But where would she go? She had no direction, no strength left, and the fire's warmth beckoned her like an old friend. Emma took a hesitant step forward, the crunch of sand beneath her boot snapping his attention to her. His head lifted, dark eyes narrowing in the dim light. She froze. The stories of warriors who could track a deer for days, who could read a single footprint in the dust, who could strike silently from the shadows, all of it rushed back to her. Yet in that moment, she saw none of the savagery people had described. She saw curiosity, caution, a man watching her as if weighing the reason fate had delivered her to his fire. Her lips parted, dry and trembling. "Please," she whispered, though she doubted he could understand her words. She lifted her hands slightly, palms open in a gesture of surrender. For what felt like an eternity, he did not move. Only the fire crackled between them. Then, slowly, he gestured toward the ground near the flames. An invitation. Emma's knees nearly gave out in relief. She crept closer, lowering herself onto the hard earth, the heat from the fire seeping into her bones. She did not dare look at him directly for long, but she could feel the weight of his gaze, steady and unreadable. She was lost, alone. And now, sitting at the fire of an Apache warrior, she had no idea whether she had found salvation, or stepped into a danger greater than the desert itself. The fire popped and hissed as dry wood caught flame, sending a spray of sparks into the night. Emma sat stiffly, her hands folded tight in her lap, trying to steady her breathing. Every flicker of the fire revealed more of him. The curve of his jaw, the dark lines of war paint faintly smudged on his skin, the strength in his shoulders, even as he sat still. He seemed carved from the desert itself, a man born to endure it, unlike her fragile form shivering beside the flames. The Apache warrior did not speak at first. His eyes stayed fixed on her, unblinking, as if trying to determine what manner of creature had stumbled into his camp. Emma lowered her gaze, the weight of his silence pressing heavy on her chest. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears, too loud, too desperate. When he finally moved, it was slow, deliberate. He reached to his side and lifted a canteen made of leather. With measured calm, he extended it toward her. Emma hesitated, her fingers twitching, unsure if she was meant to accept. His expression remained unreadable, but his hand did not waver. Her throat screamed for water. Trembling, she reached out, her fingers brushing against his for the briefest instant. The touch startled her. His skin was warm, rough, alive with strength. She pulled the canteen quickly into her lap and drank. The water was cool, blessed. Relief as it slid down her throat. She had to stop herself from draining it entirely. Thank you, she whispered, clutching it as though it were the most precious thing in the world. He tilted his head slightly, as though he recognized her gratitude even if he did not understand the words. Emma tried to gather courage, to explain. I was with my people, the wagons. Storm came and I... Her words faltered when she saw the stillness in his face. He did not interrupt, but she realized he probably understood little of what she said. The distance of language stretched between them, but somehow his silence spoke more than words. Her hands shook as she passed the canteen back. He accepted it with a nod, setting it beside him. Then, without warning, he tossed a piece of dried meat onto a flat stone near her feet. Emma stared at it, her stomach tightening with hunger. Hours had passed since she had eaten anything. Still, she looked up at him, uncertain. Was this a gift? A test? His gaze remained steady, urging but not commanding. Slowly, she reached down, picked it up, and bit into it. The meat was tough and smoky, but to her, it tasted like salvation. The firelight deepened the shadows across his face. Emma found herself watching him when she thought he wasn't looking. He was unlike any man she had ever seen. Wild, yet disciplined, fierce yet strangely calm, a storm of contradictions wrapped in silence. And though her heart still beat with fear, she could not deny the strange pull that kept her from looking away. He shifted, leaning forward slightly. The motion made her tense, but he only added another branch to the fire. Still, the closeness of his presence unsettled her, stirring something inside her that she could not name. Her mind screamed caution. This was a stranger. A warrior from a people settlers spoke of in fear. Yet, sitting here in the desert night, wrapped in firelight and silence, Emma felt something she hadn't since the storm tore her from the wagons. Safety. It was fragile, uncertain, but real. And she wondered, for the first time, if fate had not abandoned her after all, but delivered her into the hand. The flames burned higher, shadows dancing against the rocks behind them, stretching long and restless in the desert night. Emma wrapped her arms around herself, partly to ward off the chill, partly to steady the trembling she couldn't quite hide. The Apache warrior sat only a few feet away, silent, watchful, as if carved into the earth itself. Every movement he made drew her eyes, though she tried to keep them downcast. The way his hands worked when he sharpened his blade against a stone, the subtle ripple of muscle beneath his skin, the way the firelight caught in his dark eyes, it all pulled at her like an invisible thread. Emma scolded herself for noticing. She had been taught to fear men like him. Her father's voice rang in her ears, warnings of savages who lived only by violence, men who took what they wanted. Yet nothing about the warrior beside her matched those stories. He had shared his fire, his water, even his food. He had offered her safety in the midst of her despair. If he had meant her harm, he would have acted already. Still, the way he watched her made her pulse quicken. His gaze was steady, unhurried, as though He could read every unspoken thought flickering across her face. It wasn't cruel, nor was it careless. It was something deeper, something that felt dangerously close to understanding. She shifted, trying to ease the weight of his eyes, but the movement only made her more aware of herself, of how her hair had fallen loose around her shoulders, of how her dress clung with dust and sweat. She wondered what she looked like to him, a lost girl, fragile and foolish, or something else. The warrior spoke then, his voice low, rough like stones grinding together. She could not understand the words, but the sound of them stirred her. He gestured to the fire, then toward the desert beyond, his hand slicing across the darkness as if to tell her it was dangerous to wander. She caught only fragments, yet she felt the meaning. He wanted her to stay close. By the fire. By him. Emma nodded, her throat dry. "I'll stay," she whispered, though he might not understand. Still his gaze softened, as if he did. The silence stretched again, broken only by the crackle of the flames and the distant howl of a coyote. The sound made Emma's heart jump, but the warrior didn't flinch. He turned his head toward the sound, eyes narrowing, body coiled as though ready to spring. For a moment, she saw the predator in him, sharp, alert, unyielding. And yet, when his gaze returned to her, it softened again, as if the fierceness of the world beyond the fire had no place in the circle where she sat. Her fingers curled into the fabric of her dress. The tension between them was thick, pressing down on her chest. She didn't know what unsettled her more, the fear that he might touch her, or the fear that he wouldn't. When he leaned forward suddenly, she drew in a sharp breath, her body tense. But he only reached across the flames, picking up another branch to feed the fire. The motion brought him close enough that she could smell the faint scent of smoke and leather clinging to him, masculine and raw. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. Emma forced her gaze back to the fire, cheeks burning though the flames were nowhere near as hot as her skin. She wanted to speak, to fill the silence, to break the pull that bound them together in that circle of light. But no words came. Instead, she sat frozen in the warmth of his fire, caught between fear and desire, wondering if the man beside her felt the same restless storm burning within. The night deepened, and the fire became the only living thing in the desert besides the two of them. Emma tucked her knees closer to her chest, staring at the flames, as if they might protect her from the weight of the man's gaze. Every so often she risked a glance at him, only to find his dark eyes fixed steadily on her, unblinking, unreadable. Finally, she couldn't stand the silence anymore. "My name is Emma," she whispered, her voice hoarse from thirst and nerves. She pressed her palm to her chest, repeating, "Emma!" The Apache warrior tilted his head, studying her carefully. For a moment she thought he would ignore her. Then slowly, he pressed his own hand against his chest. "Dakota," he said. The word was firm, simple, like a stone laid between them. His name. Emma blinked, a flicker of relief warming her chest. They had spoken, if only a little. She repeated softly, "Dakota." The syllables felt strange on her tongue, heavy, with meaning she didn't fully understand. His lips curved, not a smile, not exactly, but a subtle shift, as though her attempt had pleased him. The air between them lightened for a heartbeat. Encouraged, Emma tried again. She touched the ground and said, "Earth." She pointed up to the sky. "Sky." She looked at him, hopeful, waiting. Dakota's gaze followed her gestures. Then he spoke in his language, slow, deliberate, pointing to the ground. "Kise." He lifted his hand toward the stars. "Taha." His voice carried a rhythm, a cadence, as though the words were part of the wind itself. Emma repeated them clumsily, stumbling over the sounds. Dakota's eyes glimmered with quiet amusement. He corrected her gently, saying the words again, slower this time. She tried once more, closer to right. For the first time, a small smile tugged at his mouth. The sight startled her more than his. Silence had. It softened the edges of his face, made him seem younger, less intimidating. She found herself smiling too, almost shyly, though her heart still raced. The exchange continued. Simple gestures, single words. Her name, his, water, fire, sky. Each new sound bridged a sliver of the distance between them. The barrier of language was wide, but with every attempt, she felt it narrowing. Yet beneath the fragile bridge of words, there was something deeper, more unspoken. The way his gaze lingered on her when she repeated his language. The way his voice dropped low when he said her name. The way her chest tightened when their eyes met, longer than was proper. At one point, as she tried to mimic a word, Emma bit her lip in frustration when she failed. Dakota's hand lifted slightly, as if to reach out and correct her, but he stopped, his fingers curling into his palm. The hesitation did not go unnoticed. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the same one burning inside her. The fire crackled, louder, as though mocking their silence. Emma turned back to the flames, hugging herself tighter. She felt the pull between them growing stronger, more dangerous. Words helped, yes, but it was the things unspoken that threatened to undo her. She wasn't sure what terrified her more, that they might never understand each other fully, or that without words. The desert night had grown colder, but Emma barely noticed the chill anymore. What unsettled her now was not the bite of the wind, but the heat that seemed to radiate between her and the Apache warrior. Dakota sat across from her, sharpening his knife with slow, steady strokes. Each drag of stone against blade whispered in the quiet, a reminder of the strength in his hands, the danger he carried, and yet the strange safety she felt beside him. Emma tried to distract herself, watching the flames instead of him, but her gaze betrayed her, slipping back to where he sat, the firelight glinting off the angle of his cheekbone, the shape of his mouth. She wondered what it would be like if he smiled again. Truly smiled, not just that fleeting ghost of expression she had seen earlier. The thought startled her. She drew her shawl tighter, scolding herself. This was madness. He was a stranger, a warrior from a people she had been told all her life to fear. And yet, no man from her world had ever made her heart race the way he did now. With nothing more than a look, a silence, a presence that filled the night. Dakota glanced up, catching her eyes before she could look away. The knife stilled in his hands. His gaze locked onto hers, dark and intense, as though he could see every secret thought she tried to hide. Emma felt her breath catch. Her fingers dug into her shawl, and she turned her face back toward the fire, cheeks burning. But the pull was there, unrelenting. She heard him shift, the quiet scuff of his boots against sand. He leaned forward, placing the knife aside, his elbows resting on his knees. He was closer now. The space between them shrank, and with it, the thin thread of control she clung to. Emma's pulse hammered. She wanted to move, to put distance between them, but her body betrayed her, frozen, caught between fear and something far more dangerous. Dakota spoke her name softly. Emma. The syllables were rough in his voice, foreign, yet deliberate. She looked at him, startled. Yes, she breathed, though she wasn't sure what she was answering. His eyes lingered on her lips, then flicked back to meet her gaze. He didn't touch her, didn't move any closer, but the intent in his stillness was louder than any action. Emma felt it like a storm pressing at the edges of her chest. Her heart told her to trust him. Her mind screamed caution, and beneath both was a restless hunger she had never known before, one that made her fingers ache to reach across the flames and touch him, to see if his warmth matched the fire's glow. The tension broke only when the wind shifted suddenly, sending sparks swirling upward. Emma startled, pulling her shawl tighter. Dakota's gaze followed the sparks, then swept toward the dark horizon, his expression sharpening. He listened, his body taut, alert to sounds she could not hear. For a moment, the wildness of him returned. A hunter, a protector, a man bound to the land in ways she could not fathom. Then his attention returned to her, softer again, though the storm between them remained. Emma exhaled shakily. The desert was vast, lonely, terrifying. But the fire had given her warmth. The warrior had given her protection. And something else, something she dared not name, stirred inside her, as untamed as the wilderness itself. She wasn't sure how long she could fight it, and judging by the way Dakota's eyes lingered on her, she wondered if he was fighting the very same thing. The night stretched on, heavy with silence. Emma tried to steady her breathing, but each inhale seemed louder than the fire's crackle, each exhale more revealing than she intended. She sat with her knees drawn up, the shawl clutched around her shoulders like armor. Yet no fabric could shield her from the weight of his gaze. Dakota had not moved for some time. He sat across from her, his posture relaxed yet charged with the tension she could feel, as though his stillness was less rest and more restraint. His dark eyes followed her in the shifting light, tracing the outline of her face, the fall of her hair, the curve of her shoulders. When she dared look back, his gaze didn't waver. It pinned her in place, made her chest tighten. She swallowed hard, her lips dry. Her stomach growled softly, betraying her hunger. Embarrassed, she lowered her head. Without a word, Dakota reached for a small bundle beside him. He pulled free, a strip of dried meat, and leaned forward, extending it across the flames. Emma hesitated, her hand hovering before taking it. In that instant, her fingers brushed against his. A jolt ran through her, sharp, electric, unexplainable. She snatched the food quickly, but the damage was done. She could still feel the warmth of his skin, the roughness of his calluses lingering against her fingertips. Her heart pounded wildly. Dakota did not pull back right away. His hand lingered near hers for a breath longer than necessary, as if he, too, had felt the spark. His gaze lowered to her lips again before returning to her eyes. Something dark and dangerous flickered there, something he seemed to battle with silently. Emma's throat went dry. She wanted to look away but couldn't. Her body screamed with a restless energy she didn't understand. Fear, desire, something in between. She clenched the strip of meat in her hand, forgetting to eat, caught entirely in the storm of his closeness. At last, Dakota shifted back, dragging his hand slowly away as though it took effort. He leaned on his knees again, looking into the eye, fire instead of at her. His jaw was tight, the muscles there working as though he were grinding down words he refused to say. Emma exhaled, only then realizing she had been holding her breath. The space between them felt charged, thick, unsteady. She forced herself to take a small bite of the food, though it tasted of nothing but smoke and nerves. She chewed slowly, her mind racing. What would he have done if he hadn't pulled back? What would she have done if he had reached for her fully? If his hand had traced the line of her cheek? If his mouth had closed the unbearable distance? The thought sent a shiver through her, not of fear, but of something far more dangerous. Dakota's voice cut through her thoughts, low and rough. "Emma," he said again, her name deliberate, heavy in the stillness. She looked up, her pulse hammering. "Yes," she whispered. His eyes locked on hers, unblinking, before he finally shook his head and muttered something in his own tongue. His tone carried weight, as if he were warning himself. Then he pushed to his feet in one fluid motion, turning his back to her, his shoulders rigid. Emma watched him stand there, silhouetted against the firelight, his hand resting near the hilt of his knife. Not because she was a threat, but because the desert was. Yet part of her wondered if the real battle was not with the wilderness at all, but within him. He had wanted to reach for her. She had wanted him to, and both of them knew it. The only question now was how much longer. The fire had burned lower, its crackle softened to a whisper, when Emma noticed Dakota's stance shift. He stood a little apart from her now, his back rigid, his head tilted as though he were listening to something beyond the reach of her ears, atat. First, she heard nothing but the sigh of the desert wind. Then it came, a low, eerie howl drifting across the plains. Wolves. The sound carried through the night like a warning, too close for comfort. Emma's chest tightened, and she instinctively drew her shawl tighter, shrinking into herself. Dakota moved without hesitation. He bent, lifted a heavier branch from the fire, and pressed the burning end into the ground so the flames licked higher. Then he circled the camp, tossing fresh wood onto the edges to widen the ring of light. His every motion was precise, practiced, the movements of a man who had done this countless nights before. Emma's fear eased, though only slightly. She watched him, unable to ignore the contrast, how his presence, so fierce and commanding, could make the wilderness itself seem less threatening. He was strength in motion, his body coiled with alertness, his gaze scanning the shadows beyond the firelight. When he returned, he paused beside her. For a heartbeat, she thought he might touch her shoulder, might offer the reassurance she craved. Instead, he crouched, eyes level with hers. His voice was low, firm. "No leave fire," he said, his English broken but clear enough. Emma nodded quickly. "I won't." Satisfied, he stood again, his figure dark against the circle of flames. He rested a hand on the hilt of his knife, his other gripping the spear propped beside him. He was a sentinel now, unyielding, watching over her as though her safety were the only task left in the world. The howls rose again, closer this time. Emma's breath caught, her pulse quickening. The night seemed alive with unseen eyes, every rustle in the brush making her jump. Yet each time she glanced at Dakota, a strange calm settled over her. He was the wall between her and the wild, and somehow she trusted him more than she had trusted anyone in her life. Minutes stretched into hours, or so it felt. The wolves never breached the ring of fire, but their cries lingered on the horizon, hungry, waiting. Emma wrapped her arms around her knees, her eyes never straying far from the tall warrior who stood guard. She should have been terrified, and she was. But beneath the fear was something else, something warmer, steadier. It wasn't only the fire that gave her comfort. It was him. She thought back to the wagons, to the people she had traveled with. Not once had she ever felt as fiercely protected as she did now, sitting in the company of a man she'd been told was an enemy. How strange the world was, to find safety in the arms of danger. As the night wore on, Dakota finally returned, to sit by the flames. His expression remained sharp, but his hand never left the knife at his side. Emma shifted closer without meaning to, the need for his presence stronger than the need for distance. When she caught his gaze, she whispered, "Thank you." She doubted he understood the words, but she hoped he felt them. His eyes lingered on her for a long moment. Then he gave a single solemn nod, a silent vow that as long as the fire burned, nothing would touch her. And though the wolves still howled in the distance, Emma's eyes grew heavy. Wrapped in firelight and his unyielding watch, she let herself drift, knowing the wild could not reach her here, not while Dakota guarded her. The wolves faded into the distance at last, their howls swallowed by the desert wind. By then, Emma had drifted into a restless sleep, curled near the fire. Her breathing was uneven, soft gasps that made her seem even smaller, more fragile than she had during the day. Dakota sat a few feet away, his back against a stone, his knife resting across his knees. His body was still, but inside him, a storm raged. He told himself to keep his eyes on the darkness, to watch for threats. Yet his gaze strayed again and again to the woman asleep by his fire. Her hair had fallen loose, strands glinting in the glow of the flames. Her face, no longer tight with fear, looked peaceful in slumber, innocent. She clutched her shawl like a child would cling to a blanket, and the sight stirred something deep within him. Dakota had spent his life hardened by the land, nights of hunger, days of battle, years of learning to master the fire in his veins. He knew control. He lived by it. And yet, with her so close, his discipline wavered. His fingers tightened on the hilt of his knife, not out of anger, but to remind himself of purpose. She was a stranger. She did not belong to him. She was lost, vulnerable, and trusting him more than she should. To cross the distance between them, to take what he wanted, it would be dishonor. But oh, how he wanted. Each time she shifted in her sleep, her shawl slipping slightly, his chest tightened. He saw the curve of her neck, pale, in the firelight, and his breath caught. He wanted to reach across the space, to brush the hair from her cheek, to trace the softness of skin his hands were not meant to touch. He ground his teeth, dragging his eyes back to the horizon. The night whispered temptations, the fire mocked. Him with its restless crackle. He muttered under his breath in his own tongue, words of restraint, prayers for control. Emma stirred then, her head lifting slightly. For a moment her eyes fluttered open. She looked at him, hazy with sleep. "Dakota," she whispered. His name slurred, but unmistakable. His heart jolted. Her voice, soft, trusting, spoken without fear, cut through his resolve. He should not answer. He should let her drift back into dreams. But the sound of his name on her lips pulled him closer to the edge than he cared to admit. "I am here," he said roughly, his English broken but clear enough. Her lips curved in the faintest smile, and then she slipped back into sleep. Dakota sat frozen, her smile seared into his mind. He closed his eyes, inhaling deeply, fighting the urge that threatened to undo him. She was not his to claim. She was only his to protect. But in the quiet of the night, when only the fire bore witness, he admitted to himself the truth he could not deny. He was losing control, and if she stayed by his fire much longer, if she continued to whisper his name with such trust, he feared there would come a moment when restraint would no longer hold. The warrior who had mastered hunger, fear, and pain now faced the greatest battle. The first hint of dawn brushed the horizon in pale gold, softening the harsh edges of the desert. The fire had burned low, reduced to glowing embers that pulsed faintly against the morning chill. Emma stirred awake, blinking as the cold air kissed her skin. For a moment, confusion clouded her mind. The fire, the rocks, the empty expanse of wilderness. Then it returned to her, the storm, the wagon train, the night by an Apache warrior's fire. She turned her head slowly. Dakota was there, exactly, as he had been the night before, sitting tall and alert, though his eyes looked tired. He hadn't slept. Not once. He had stayed awake, guarding her as if her safety were his sole duty. Emma's chest tightened at the thought. No one had ever watched over her like that. Not her father, who was stern and distant. Not the men in the wagon train, who saw her as fragile and troublesome. But this man, this stranger, who owed her nothing, had stood between her and the darkness all night. She pulled her shawl tighter and whispered softly, "Good morning." Dakota turned his head toward her, his expression unreadable. His eyes lingered on her face, then dipped briefly to the shawl she clutched, before returning to the horizon. "Morning," he said, the word rough, foreign on his tongue. Emma smiled. faintly. His effort to speak her language stirred warmth inside her, more than she wanted to admit. The silence between them was different in the daylight. Less dangerous, more tender, though no less charged. Emma found herself studying him openly now, the strength of his arms, the proud line of his jaw, the quiet determination that clung to him like a second skin. She should have been afraid, still, but instead she felt something else entirely. A pull she could neither explain nor resist. She thought of the night before, of how he had said her name, how he had stayed awake while she slept, how his eyes had softened when she smiled. A truth formed slowly in her chest, fragile but undeniable. She was not just grateful to him. She was drawn to him. The realization frightened her more than the wolves had. Dakota rose to his feet, breaking her thoughts. He crossed to where a small leather pouch hung from his belongings and pulled out a piece of dried bread-like food. He offered it to her without a word. Emma accepted it carefully, their fingers brushing again. The simple touch sent heat racing through her, just as it had the night before. She tried to mask her reaction, lowering her gaze to the food, but her cheeks betrayed her with a flush. "Thank you," she murmured. Dakota gave a small nod, his eyes still on her, studying her as though trying to read the emotions she fought to hide. For a while they ate in silence. The sun climbed higher, warming the land, painting everything in gold. Yet Emma felt the fire inside her had little to do with the sun. She was supposed to be finding her way back to her people. But as she sat there, safe in the circle of his presence, she realized something she had never dared think before. Perhaps she didn't want to. Perhaps the desert had not taken her away from safety, but led her to it. And perhaps the man before her, fierce and untamed, was not her captor or her enemy. Perhaps he was the very thing she had been searching for without knowing it. The thought made her breath catch. She dared not say it aloud, not even to herself. But she knew. She was already his. The morning sun crept higher, bathing the desert in its relentless light. Emma shaded her eyes, though part of her wished the night had lasted longer. The night had felt like a secret world, a place where she and Dakota existed outside of rules, outside of fear. Now, with daylight, the world seemed to intrude again. Dakota extinguished the last of the embers with sand, his movements efficient, disciplined. He slung his pouch over his shoulder and gestured toward the distant ridge. "We go," he said simply. Emma nodded, though her heart tightened. To leave the fire meant leaving behind the small circle of intimacy it had given them. Still, she followed, her steps careful on the rocky earth. For hours, they moved across the desert. The silence between them was thick, but not empty. It was filled with unspoken things, questions Emma wanted to ask, words Dakota seemed unwilling to share. His presence steadied her, even when the land grew harsher, even when thirst parched. Her throat, at last, they stopped near a shallow stream trickling between stones. Emma knelt eagerly, cupping her hands to drink. The water was cold, sharp against her tongue. When she glanced up, Dakota was watching her again, not like a guard watches, but like a man who cannot help himself. Her breath faltered under his gaze. She wiped her lips, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "What is it?" she asked softly. Dakota hesitated, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "You." He struggled for the words, searching. At last he shook his head, as if surrendering to the truth. "You make it hard to be strong." The words hit her harder than she expected. Heat rushed to her face, her heart thudding. She wanted to deny it, to brush it off, but the intensity in his eyes pinned her in place. "Dakota," she whispered. His name, tasting the weight of it, letting it linger between them. He stepped closer, just a single pace,
but it was enough to shorten the distance to something dangerous.
His hand lifted as though drawn by a force greater than himself. For a moment Emma thought he would touch her cheek, but at the last instant he pulled back, his fingers curling into a fist. "I cannot," he said hoarsely, as though reminding himself. Emma's chest ached at the restraint in his voice. She wanted to tell him she understood. That she was fighting the same battle, torn between fear and longing, between propriety and a fire that refused to be smothered. But words failed her. Instead, she reached for his hand. It was a bold act, one that shocked even her. Her fingers slipped into his, tentative yet deliberate. His hand was large, calloused, rough with years of survival, but it closed around hers with surprising gentleness. For a long moment, they stood there in the quiet, hands joined. No vows, no declarations. Just a silent recognition of something neither could deny any longer. The fire from the night before had not faded with dawn. It lived in them still, stronger than ever, binding them in ways the desert, the world, and even their own wills could not undo. Dakota finally released her hand, though not without reluctance. His voice was steady when he spoke, though his eyes betrayed him. "Stay close, always." Emma swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded. Always. And with that, they walked on. Two souls bound not by chance but by fire. A fire neither of them could control, and